In this one, we'll be looking at a few ways to carve a virtual pumpkin. Here's a summary of what we'll cover. We'll start by quickly modeling a pumpkin, then we'll make a shader for the stem, one for the pumpkin skin, and one for the inside of the pumpkin, so it'll look different when we cut into it. The first carving method is destructive and involves deleting faces to get the shape that you want. The next method is using SVG images, giving them some thickness and using the Boolean modifier to cut into our pumpkin. The last method is using an image and a displacement modifier, some careful placement, and then using a Boolean modifier to cut the image into our pumpkin. It's tricky to get it working right, but you can get some really cool results with it. Alright, let's get started. Alright, so here we are. I'm in Blender 2.93, and we're just going to start off by modeling our pumpkin. If you want a more in-depth video about modeling pumpkins, my last video was all about that, so you can just check that one out. So we'll just start by adding in a circle right here, and I'm going to make sure this has 36 vertices like that. I'm going to hit Control 3, and that's going to add a subdivision surface modifier with 3 levels. And we're just going to go into edit mode with tab. I'm going to hit 1 to look from the front. I want to make sure I'm in vertex select right here, and I'm just going to extrude that upward on the z-axis like that. Go into edge select right here, select that top edge, and Alt Shift left click to select the bottom one. I'm going to hit Alt Z to look through, and then I'm going to hit E to extrude and S to scale. This is going to be the top and the bottom of the pumpkin like that, and I'll just scale that on the z-axis like that just to bring it up a little. I'll do a loop cut in the middle with Control R like that, and I'll just scale it out slightly. Just going to make sure I'm in edge select right here. Just going to select that front one, going to skip 2 and then shift select like that. And then before pressing anything else, you just want to hit Control, Shift, and plus on the numpad, and that's basically going to repeat the selection. You can just keep pressing that until it goes all the way around like this. Then go up to select, select loops, edge loops like that, and it should select all of those loops for you. So hit N to open up the side panel right here. I'm going to go up to Item, and down here we have Mean Crease. I'm just going to put 0.5 in there, and we'll just make all of these loops a little sharper. I'm going to scale it in just a little like that. So now we can see we have a basic pumpkin shape. Back in edit mode, I'm just going to select this bottom loop with Alt and left click, hit Control F to bring up this face menu right here and choose Grid Fill like that. I'm going to hit Control 7, and that's just going to look at the bottom. And you can just mess with the span and the offset until this looks good for you. So I set span at 10, offset at 4, and I have simple blending turned on, and it just cleans it up a little when I do that. So I'm going to select the top also, scale that on the Z by 0, hit Control F, Grid Fill, and I'll do the same thing. I'll set that to 10 and turn this until it looks straight like that. And we're going to make the stem next. So I'm just going to turn Mean Crease all the way up. You can see it will sharpen that. I'm going to extrude that on the Z-axis and turn Mean Crease all the way down, just so the only sharp part is this ring right here. I'm going to scale that in very slightly, extrude, scale like that, extrude that upward, extrude again just a little, and then I'm going to scale that up, extrude and scale just to bring it in a little, and I'll pull that down like that. And so this is our pumpkin right now. So next I want to separate the stem from the body. Back in edit mode, I still have this face selected. I'm just going to hit Control plus to expand the selection until the whole stem is selected. And then you can just hit P and separate by selection. And you can see over here it made a separate object for us. So one of them is the body and the other one is the stem. So over here, I'm just going to select the stem, drag it on top of pumpkin right here, and hold Shift, and that will parent it. So now when we move this, it should follow. And I'm actually going to scale this down until it's a more realistic size. So right now this is 1.46 meters tall, which is pretty big. So I'm just going to scale this down until it's like close to 0.3. It'll be like around a foot like that. That should be fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm just going to Control A and apply the scale like that. Okay, so the reason that I separated the body from the stem right here is so we can add a solidify modifier, so when we cut through, it looks like it actually has some thickness. So I'm just going to go into X-ray mode right here and add a solidify modifier. And I want to make sure that's going in and not out, so I'll just change the offset like that to 1. And I think 0.02 is the thickness that I want right here. And I'm also going to select both of these, right click, and shade smooth. You can see that I have some artifacts right here, and that's because it's trying to smooth like around this hole right here. So if you don't want that, you can select both of these, go down to Object Data Properties. Under Normals, you can click Auto Smooth. And if you hold Alt while you click that, it will work for the stem and the pumpkin. But if you don't hold Alt, it'll only work for the actively selected one. And when you do that, it should clear up that shading mistake right there. Okay, next we're going to work on the shading. So before we do that, I want to be able to see inside the pumpkin because we're going to have a texture for the outside skin and the inside skin. So for that, I'm just going to add in a cube right here, and we're going to use this to cut through our pumpkin so that we can see the inside properly. I'm also going to go over here to Object Properties, down to Viewport Display, and I'm just going to change this from textured to bounds. We can select our pumpkin again, go over to modifiers, add a Boolean modifier, and we can just select that cube right here, and it'll cut through. We can also change this to fast, and it should just calculate a little faster so we can actually move this around without it taking forever. So now that we have this set up, I'm just going to go into the shading area right here. So most of this video I'll be using cycles, but you can use Eevee for this also. And when I'm making my materials to start out, I'll be using Material Preview up here. So with my pumpkin selected, I'm going to go over here to Material Properties. I'm going to add a new material like that. And this will just be the outside of the pumpkin. So I'll name it Pumpkin Outside. And I'll just change this color to something orange. And I'll leave the roughness where it is. And I want to add some bump to this. So I'll just add in a noise texture right here. I'll add in a bump node like that, and we'll plug that into the normal. We'll plug the noise texture into the height. And I'll also add in a texture coordinate, and we'll plug the object texture coordinate into the vector right here. And you can see now it's giving us quite a bit of bump, a little too much, but we also want to change the scale. So I'll just make this a little higher, maybe like 10, that should be fine. And I'll turn the distance down to 0.1, and then we can just adjust the strength until it looks however we like. I just want it to be pretty subtle, so I think maybe around here, around 0.2 or 0.3. So I already have a set created, and it's basically just a plane with a back and a bevel right there, and I have it shaded smooth, and I also have a light right here, and I also have another little point light right here that I'm going to use as like a candle. So in cycles now, I'm just going to hide our cube so we can see inside of our pumpkin. And I think the bump is looking pretty good. So next we'll work on the inside of the pumpkin. So with our pumpkin selected, I'm just going to come over here and hit the plus button, and that's going to create a new slot so we can have two textures here. Bring in our pumpkin outside, and I'll hit this button right here. It looks like two pieces of paper, and that will basically just create a new texture, but it will use all the same nodes. And I'll just rename that to pumpkin inside. And I want to be able to see it because you can see when I change this, we're not actually changing anything. So over in our modifiers, we'll take the solidify, and under materials, we'll set material offset to 1 and the rim offset to 1. You can see now this kind of inverted, and I don't like the way that happened. So I think the problem is that I just need to come over here and rearrange some things. What I'm going to do with this selected, I'm going to hit tab, select everything with A, and with our pumpkin inside selected, I'm going to hit assign. And now the inside and the outside is working, but I want to move this to the top, and now it's working all right. So you might have to mess around with the order these things are going for it to work correctly. But if you did it the same exact way as me, with your solidify modifier set up this way, then it should work fine. So I want the inside to be a little more yellow, so I'll push that over a little. I want it to be have maximum value all the way up, and I'll make this that looks okay. And I also want to turn the detail up right here on our noise texture, just so it looks a little more rough. One other thing I want the material to be able to do is when we have a light inside of our pumpkin, I want it to be able to shine through the pumpkin a little. Kind of like when people carve into a pumpkin without going all the way through, it usually creates this kind of glowing effect, and I want our model to do the same thing. Make our cube visible again and pull it out very slightly, and you see at a certain point it's cutting into it, but it's not going all the way through. Turn on scene lights and scene world, and I'm also going to switch over to cycles for this. So with our pumpkin inside selected, like that, we can just turn up the subsurface a little, so 0.02, something like that, and you can see it will start shining through. I'm also going to turn the subsurface radius, each of these to 1, otherwise it'll give everything a slightly red tint. And we can also copy this color and paste it over here. So now you can see it's coming through a little, and you can adjust this value. If you set it to something higher, it'll glow even more. But I like for you to be able to see that this part right here in the middle is actually thinner than the outside. And if this isn't working for you that well right now, it might be because your model is too big. If you have this scaled to like a real life size, the subsurface scattering will be a little more realistic. You can see in EV, this isn't really working for us right now. So one thing you can do if you're using EV, or if you're just using a bigger model, is you can bring in a mix shader like this, and I'm just going to turn this all the way down for now. And you can bring in a translucent right here, and I'll just copy this color over like that so it's the same color. And you can see when I turn it up very slightly, I'll just set this to like 0.1. You can see it's glowing now. It's not the same exact effect that you would get with subsurface scattering, but it does mimic it a little, and it works in EV. So that's what I would recommend using. But I'll usually set this to something smaller, like 0.05 or something like that. And it also looks okay in cycles. So this is an option for you, but I'm not going to use it in this tutorial. I'm just going to use subsurface scattering like that because I think it looks pretty good. So next I'm going to select our stem, and we're going to create a texture for that. So I'll add in pumpkin outside like that, and I'm just going to copy it again right here. And I'll change that to stem, and we'll just change this. You can just make it brown, or I know sometimes when it gets dry, they get quite a bit lighter and flaky. So if you want, you can experiment with this, make it however you think looks good. The stem, I definitely want to be more rough. I don't think it should be shiny like that. So I'll put it up pretty high, and I'll also turn the detail up quite a bit to like 10, something like that. So we're not going to be focusing on the stem too much, so I'm not going to put a whole lot of time and effort into this material. I think it'll look fine just like this. All right, and now we're done with our materials, so I'm just going to go back into layout mode. And we don't really need this cube anymore, so I'm just going to select it and just delete it like that. And it looks like our pumpkin is floating off of the ground, so I'm just going to select our pumpkin and the stem and go into edit mode with both of those selected. Make sure you have everything selected, and I'm just going to bring that down until it's resting on this 0 line right here. So I'm just going to make sure that our pumpkin and our stem are selected, and I'm going to hit Shift D, X. I'm going to move that on the X axis right there. And once we place that, before doing anything else, I'll just hit Shift R, and that'll just repeat the action like that. And we'll just make 4 of those for now. I'm going to select all of those and just move them closer to the middle. And I'm also going to go into X-ray mode and place a light in each of them. And instead of Shift D, I'm going to hold Alt D for this. And that's basically going to duplicate them but keep them linked. So if we change the brightness or color of one, all of them will change. We can hit Shift R for that also. All right, so the first carving method is actually going to be pretty simple. We just have to apply our subdivision surface modifier. So with this selected, you just want to select this, and you can come to the drop down and hit apply or Control A. And now when we go into edit mode, you can see we have all of this topology to mess around with right now. One thing that you can do, I would say the easiest way, is make sure you're in face select mode right here. And I'm just going to hit C to go into circle select. And you can actually just start selecting what you want like that. So that'll be an eye. This will be the other eye. And I'll select some of this for a mouth. And you can hold Shift and select like that to deselect things. So now with all of this selected that we want, I'm just going to go over here to Object Data Properties. And I'm going to add all of these to a vertex group like that. And we can just hit Assign, and I'll name this Face. You can name it whatever you want. And now Over here, I'm going to hit X to delete faces like that. So because we made this, even though we deleted it, we can see if we go over to vertex select and hit select, we have all of the outer rim selected like that. And that will make it so we can smooth this out. So now you can come over here to your modifiers and add a smooth modifier like that. I'll put that before the solidify. And if we turn this up, it's going to smooth the entire pumpkin like that. But it gives us the option to use a vertex group so we can add in the face. And now when we turn this up, it's only smoothing out the face right there. So if you want to keep it jagged like this, you can, or you can smooth it out slightly. One other thing you can do, very similar to this method, come up here and make sure you're in edge select for this. And then you can hit K, that's the knife tool, and you can literally start drawing. So with the knife tool now, I'm just going to give this pumpkin an eyebrow. So I'll hit K and I'll just draw an eyebrow on like this. And when you're done, you can just hit enter like that, and we'll see if this is closed. It looks like it might not be entirely closed. So I'll just select this loop right here, and I think it's closed now. So now with that selected, we can hit right click and edge split like that. And if this worked properly, we can come over to face select. We can hit L and it will select the inside. Now, if this doesn't work for you, it might not be closed completely. And you might have to select each face individually so that you can hit X and delete them like that. And you can see now we just drew an eyebrow like that. So I'll do the same thing for the other side now. Just going to make sure that I'm in edge select up here. I'll hit K and just draw an eyebrow. This one will be a little bigger, arched eyebrow. When you're done, you can just hit enter. And hopefully this is completely closed. It looks like it might be. I'll hit right click and edge split. And we'll see if we can select everything inside with L, and it looks like we can. So we'll hit X and delete the faces, and that's pretty much it. So the knife tool is also a pretty easy method, and it's actually really close to how you would carve a pumpkin in real life with a knife. I'd say one of the downsides is that this is destructive, and you get some pretty like messy shapes. But I think in the right context, this could look pretty good, and it could work for whatever you need it to. All right, so for the next method, we're going to be using SVGs. And so there are a few ways to go about doing this. The way I did it is using a program called Affinity Designer, which is a paid program, but you can also use a program like Inkscape, which is free. I definitely recommend making it in your program of choice with simple shapes, because then the SVG is going to be very clean. You can also hand draw it. And Inkscape allows you to convert images into SVGs and export them that way also. But if you do this, you have to make sure that you draw pretty cleanly. The SVGs are usually a little more messy, and by that I mean they usually just have a lot more points to them because they're vectors. They need to have a point for each little variation in shape. So you can do that, it is an option, but it might give you a little more trouble. So back in Blender now, we'll just import this file by going to File, Import, Scalable Vector Graphics right here. And I know that my file is on the desktop. I just have it named as Face1 right here. You can click that and hit Import. And you can see now it's brought in right here, but the origin point is down in the corner. So I'll just right click it and set origin to center of mass right here. And it'll move it to the center. I can also rotate it on the X by 90 degrees. And I'll just pull it out a little right here. I also don't like how it's black, but that's just a preference thing. I'm just going to delete it over here by hitting minus. And then I'm just going to line this up with our pumpkin over here. And I might want to scale it up a little until it's the right size. So I made this with simple shapes, and you can see if I hit edit mode, this is still a curve, and there are very few points because these are all straight lines and very smooth arcs like that. So that's one benefit of building this with simple shapes. And I don't need to edit this anymore, so I'm actually going to right click it and convert it to a mesh. And having done that, we can come over here to our modifiers and add a solidify modifier. And I don't want the edges to look straight like this, so I'll right click it and shade smooth. You can come over here to object data properties and turn on auto smooth. So now the edges don't look flat like that. And I'll just turn the solidify modifier up until it goes into our pumpkin, and you want to go through this wall right here. So now I'm going to use this to cut a hole into our pumpkin, and I want to be able to see through this. So I'll come over here to object properties, back down to viewport display, and turn this to wire like that so we can see through it. I'll select the pumpkin, come over to modifiers, and we'll add a Boolean modifier. And before I select anything, I'll turn the solver to fast. And if it doesn't work, you can always change it to exact later. So now I'll select that face as our object, and you can see it's cutting through now. And we can hide that and go into cycles to take a look. And it looks pretty good. It looks like a real jack-o'-lantern. And it's much neater than the one that we carved out like that. And because it's non-destructive, we can always modify our face in right here like that. So you can see I can scale it up and down. You can rotate it however you want. If you want, you could even come in here and edit the points like this. But I don't really want to do that. But you do have the option to. The downside is that the Boolean modifier can be pretty slow sometimes. So I definitely recommend saving your file quite a bit just in case Blender crashes. So I'm just going to repeat this process just one more time to put a face on this pumpkin over here. So I'll go to File, Import, SVG. I'm going to bring in face 2 this time. You can see the face is over here now. I'm going to right click it to move the origin point to the center. RX90 like that. I'll get rid of that material also. And now I'll just line it up with this pumpkin right here. So this is a much spookier, kind of evil looking face. And I don't need to edit it anymore, so I'm going to convert it to a mesh with right click, convert to mesh. And we can add a solidify over here. You just want to turn that up until it goes through. That looks good. And then we'll select our pumpkin, add a Boolean modifier. I'm going to change this to fast and select the face object right there. And now if you can't see through this, you can just hide it over here like that. And it looks a little broken. So I'll select the pumpkin and change this to exact to see if that helps. And it seems like it did. You could also leave it set to fast and just kind of scale this down slightly. Sometimes if you scale it a little, it'll work. And it seems like that helped also. So the next one is a little trickier to set up, and I recommend saving before this just in case Blender crashes. But basically what we're going to do is use a photo to cut into our pumpkin. So to get started, what we need to do is add in a plane right here. And I'm just going to rotate that on the X by 90, scale it down a little. I'm going to bring it forward. And we're going to line this up to our pumpkin right here. Like that. You can go into X-ray mode so you can actually see through. So I'm going to add a subdivision surface modifier with Control 4. And I'll just scale this until it looks good. I'm basically just going to make sure that this isn't bigger than our pumpkin. I want it to be able to fit on the front like that. And when we have this where we want it, I'll show you how to add in the picture. So I'm just going to add a displace modifier right here. And we can click plus for a new texture. And I'll just change the strength to something like 0.1. So I can hit Control A, apply the scale, and I'm also going to apply the rotation like that. We can hit this button to go into the texture tab. And we already have this texture set to image or movie. We just have to choose which one. You can just hit open. And I have a folder on my desktop that I have like royalty-free images that I got from Pexels and Unsplash. And for this example, I'll just use this X-ray of a hand. And you can see it's starting to displace, but it's kind of hard to see what's going on. So one way to make this easier is instead of using local coordinates, we'll use object coordinates. And now we have to create an object. So I'll add in an empty. I'll add a cube right here. And I'm just going to move that until the center is kind of close to the center of our plane. And I'll select that as an object. So it's just named empty. I'll rename this photo, Control Photo, like that. And now this will let us be able to scale it down. And it looks a little broken. I think we might have to rotate this 90 degrees like that. We'll see. So now we can see the outline of the hand vaguely, but it's really low resolution. So we might need to turn this up. I'll turn it up to 6, and I'm actually going to apply this because it won't let us go above 6. I'll just add another one in right here, like that. And if the higher you turn this up, the slower this is going to go, so definitely be careful. So now we can see the shape of the hand, and we can make it whatever size we want. But it's also tiling, and we don't want that. We can just select our plane, hit this button to go into the texture tab again. Under mapping, change this from repeat to clip. We can also smooth some of this out. This might be pixelated. It might just have some noise in the photo. We can smooth that out under sampling. we can just turn this size option, we can just turn that up. So the higher you turn it up, you can see the smoother it'll get. If you turn it up too high, it'll just get too blurry. I think for this photo, 20 makes it look pretty good. We also have this frame right here. You can change that by going to colors down here and just turning the contrast up, or I could turn the brightness down also, but you can see turning the contrast up works because this is a dark color in the back, and now we can't see it anymore. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is shrink wrap this plane to our pumpkin. So for this, I'm just gonna hide the displacement to make it move a little faster, and I'll add in a shrink wrap modifier right here, and we'll select the pumpkin as the target, and you can see it's immediately trying to snap to the surface of the pumpkin. Another thing, I'm actually going to move this to the very top. We don't need the shrink wrap to have super high resolution, so we can put it before the subdivision, and that should be fine. I don't really want this to shrink. You can see when we look from the front and I turn it on and off that it's shrinking quite a bit. So I'll change this from nearest point to project like that. And if this doesn't work, you might have to apply your scale and your rotation. And you can also try flipping this from positive to negative if it's not working. But in my case, setting the axis to Y and setting it to positive works. I don't want this to be cutting into our pumpkin model too much. So I can change the offset to something like 0.02. That's actually way too far. I want it to be pretty close, but I just don't want it to be touching. So I'll set it to 0.005, and you can see it's off of the surface, but it doesn't seem to be poking through at any points. And when we have this where we want it, we actually want to apply it. So if you think you might want to edit this a little, what you can do is you can just duplicate it like that, and you can hide it so that if you need to go back, you have something that's not applied. But back on this one, I'm actually going to come down here and apply it like that. So now we can turn our displacement back on, and you can see that it's displacing along the normal, and it's also going through our pumpkin. So we don't really want that. We want to change the mid-level to 0. And I think instead of going in the normal direction, I'll just have this go on the Y like that. And now you can see it's going through our pumpkin like that, which is actually what we want, because we're going to use a Boolean modifier to cut this shape into our pumpkin. But in order to do that, we need to give this some thickness, because right now it's just a plane. So to add thickness, we can add a solidify modifier right here. And I'm just going to put that before the displacement. Basically what you want to do is make this thick enough so that you can't see the face of the pumpkin through here. So I'll turn it up, and you can see at this point, we can't see the face of the pumpkin anymore. And this looks like it's displacing quite a bit. So I'm actually going to turn this down to something quite a bit lower, like 0.02. Okay, so when we have this where we want it, I'm just gonna change the viewport display so it's using wireframe also, so that way we can see our pumpkin. I'm gonna give this a save in case it crashes, and now on our pumpkin, we can add the Boolean modifier and see if this actually works. So I'll add in the Boolean, change this to fast, just so it's a little less computationally heavy, and we'll select that displacement right there. It looks like it's not immediately working. So we can try moving our empty around very slightly. So I'll just scale that up a little and see if that helps at all. You can see it's flickering. When it stops flickering, you just want to make sure you stop it right there. And this is actually cutting through now. So we can just hide this right here and see what this looks like in cycles. It's looking pretty good. You can see that the parts that are cutting through deeper are actually lighter, and that's thanks to our subsurface scattering. You can totally experiment with different displacement strengths too. So if you select the photo, I'll change the displacement to go up a little more, 0.05. So it's actually cutting through, and you might need to just move your empty around that's controlling your photo. I'll just scale that down slightly. Obviously, it's not realistic to have any floating pieces in there, so you could always apply this and then clean it up a little or something like that, but I'm not really going to worry about it too much right here. And when you have this set up the way you want, you can pretty quickly swap out the images too. So back in the modifiers, I'll just click this to go into the texture tab, and we can just swap out the image with this folder right here. See if it works. We didn't even have to adjust it. It just worked immediately. And that looks pretty cool. If you want more detail, you can just turn this blur value down quite a bit. And it broke. So if this isn't working, you can always try changing this to exact. Sometimes it'll work a little better, but it'll also be quite a bit slower. You can also change the depth of the displacement. So I'll change this back to 0.02, and now it's just cutting into the surface without going all the way through. And I actually like this one a lot because it's pretty detailed. It looks pretty good. We'll see if it works with this picture of an owl. That works pretty well also. It actually looks pretty good in Eevee with these lights. It's pretty interesting. We'll check out this photo, and I'll turn this down quite a bit. Well, it looks like that's breaking it a little. Okay, I finally got it to work just by tweaking some values around. And even with a colored portrait photo, this looks pretty good. So as you saw, you do have to mess around with this quite a bit to get it to work properly. But when you do get it working, the results can be pretty impressive. All right, that's it for this one. I hope you all learned something. Thanks for watching and have a good one.